At Unlearn, we have a pretty ambitious goal to reimagine the way that we think about medicine. And I think that there's nothing that's more important. There's no industry that's more important than medicine. And as a result, we really need to be ambitious. I think that it is too important for us to accept the status quo. There are a lot of ways that medical scientists are innovating constantly. We've seen tremendous improvements in lots of indications with new therapeutic modalities coming out every day. But there's also a lot of things that we can do to continue to improve, to accelerate the development of medical research. And really, there's one core challenge that I would say permeates the core of medical science, and that is uncertainty in patients' outcomes. We don't know why some patients get better when other patients deteriorate. And this challenge, it affects everybody in the space, but especially patients and their families, right? This uncertainty of not being able to know the road ahead. Also affects physicians trying to care for their patients who don't know what the right treatment is to get the best outcome for their patient. And it affects researchers. This uncertainty that we have in outcomes, the variability, makes it very difficult to determine which treatments actually work, even on average. And it's really the fundamental reason why we need to run really large randomized trials that take 5 to 10 years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to determine which treatments are really effective. So what we'd like to be able to do is to develop a new set of tools that allow us to see through this fog of uncertainty. And we believe at Unlearn that artificial intelligence is going to be that tool. That we are going to be able to peer through that fog of uncertainty by using AI to forecast a patient's future health. And that's why we've focused our efforts on creating a new kind of AI technology that we call a digital twin of a patient. We pioneered this space in 2018 with a paper that we published on Scientific Reports using generative machine learning methods to create comprehensive forecasts of health outcomes for patients with Alzheimer's disease. And now the underlying technology that we use there is actually patented. It's recently granted a patent for this technology. But we also want to move forward. Just because we have done this 6 years ago now, 6 years ago, we don't want to just stay there. So today there's a lot of new technologies that I want to tell you all about. The things that we have been doing to continue to innovate and push the field forward. But before I actually talk about the things that are new, I want to go back a bit and tell you about what a patient's digital twin really is. What we mean when we say that. So we want to create a comprehensive forecast of a patient's health outcomes. We're going to start by collecting some data as a baseline. So the patient comes in, we're going to have their first visit. We're going to measure different characteristics of the patient, like their symptoms, various biomarkers that tell us about the progression of their disease, and also just background information, say about their genetics or medical history. And then we're going to use a pre-trained AI model, a generative model, to predict how those symptoms and biomarkers may evolve, what they may look like at the patient's next visit, and at their second visit, and third visit, and so on, so that we can build up a forecast of what that patient's health may look like in the future. And this is fundamentally what we're going to call that patient's digital twin. But health outcomes are not deterministic. there are lots of things that can happen to a person that may affect their health outcome, that are going to be very, very difficult to predict. I might be perfectly healthy today, and then I get unlucky on the subway ride home and I sit next to a person with the flu. That's not something that we're going to be easily able to predict. So as a result, we need to think about the future state of a patient as being somehow probabilistic. And our goal is not to exactly predict what happens to a patient, but instead to forecast these probabilities. So we can take our model and we can generate one possible future for that patient. And we can repeat that process over and over and over again to build out a full distribution that describes the potential outcomes for that patient in the future. So a digital twin is going to be, not only is it a forecast of what happens to a patient, their future health, it is a probabilistic forecast. And then we can capture the information from this distribution by looking at something like its mean, which we're going to call a prognostic score, looking at something like its standard deviation or other different types of characteristics that describe the distribution of that patient's future health outcomes. So a patient's digital twin is going to be a comprehensive, probabilistic forecast of their individual future health. That's what we mean. Some of you may be familiar with a really famous quote, statistics quote that says that all models are wrong, but some are useful. But what makes a model useful? On the one hand, we want it to be predictive and to be able to tell us something about what's really going to happen in the future. But I want to offer in an alternative view about what can make a model really useful, which is that models that can tell you when they're likely to be wrong are really useful. Not only is a model can make a good prediction, but sometimes that model's predictions are going to be wrong. And if we know that ahead of time, if we can tell the model is going to be really confident here and really uncertain there, then we can use that information to get better outcomes in clinical trials or in medicine. And so when we thought about what we wanted to develop as we continue to improve our machine learning technologies, we wanted to focus on the ability to develop models that can tell us when they're going to be wrong. That is, we wanted better calibrated estimates of uncertainty. Of course, we always want more accurate forecasts anyways. We still want to have lots of predictive power. We also wanted to be able to make predictions for all of these things at any future time, not at just some pre-specified times. And, well, this is really more internal. We wanted to use some new technologies that would dramatically speed up our actual internal development, so that we're not only releasing models every 6 months, but much more frequently. And so to do that, we have done 3 things. First, we have built bigger and better training data sets. Huge amount of work within the company on our internal data products, getting much better, much more longitudinal and rich patient information. We have also developed completely new kinds of generative models, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then we've also had to combine these completely new kinds of generative models with new types of neural networks for predicting time series. So we've done all of these things and put them together. It has been a essentially years-long process of development to get to what we're talking about today. These new machine learning technology that we've developed is called a Neural Boltzmann machine. I'm not going to describe in detail anything of this technology. If people are interested in, there's a blog post that we posted on our Substack, I think today, that goes into some more detail, and there's a paper that we published a few weeks ago. I would simply say that this is an extremely rare thing for a startup to do. Not only to use artificial intelligence technologies, but to create brand new AI technologies that have never been seen before, an entirely new architecture for machine learning, incredibly rare. But what really matters is what we can use these things for. So I'd like to introduce our next generation digital twin generator for patients with Alzheimer's disease, the model that we can use to create digital twins. In comparison to our previous version of this model, which is based on that patented technology, we have much less bias. So here we can predict the clinical dementia rating as a function of time for there's actual observed patients, there's our previous model, and there's the new model. And we have much less bias, not only across the population level, which is what this plot shows, but also across important subpopulations like early or late stage disease. We also have much more predictive power than we used to have. So we can look at, say, the correlation between the outcomes predicted by our new models versus the old models, and we are much more accurate at predicting which patients will actually progress quickly or slowly. And we can also ask these new models to tell us when they're likely to be wrong. And we can do this dramatically better than we could before. So here, we're going to look at the correlation between when a model says it's wrong, says it's likely to be wrong, and its actual error. So we'd like to be able to say that the model can predict when it's actually going to be wrong. It can give you a confidence, and if it's got high confidence, it's likely to be right, and low confidence, it's likely to be wrong. And we have a dramatic improvement. It's actually quite strong signal in terms of our ability for these models to predict when they are right and when they are wrong. And those are just three simple plots looking at the clinical dementia rating scale. But I said that our models are comprehensive. We do not just predict the overall scale, we predict every individual component of that scale. Every individual component of the clinical dementia rating scale and every individual component of the mini mental state exam. And every component of the Alzheimer's disease assessment scale, the functional activities questionnaire, neuropsychiatric inventories, and over a dozen important lab and vital measurements. So when we say that our models are comprehensive, that's what we mean. We're not predicting one thing. We are predicting every measurement that you would want to make about a patient in a clinical trial. That's what we mean to create a digital twin of a patient with Alzheimer's. We've done a lot of work in the past looking at Alzheimer's disease. We have a number of publications about that work, but it's very important that we expand into new disease areas, and we're going to be doing this much more rapidly. And so today I also want to introduce a new digital twin generator for patients with ALS. And we actually just announced today a new partnership or collaboration with a clinical stage company called Curalis, working on developing new treatments for ALS. And just like our Alzheimer's disease model, we can look at things like the ALS-FRS scaled measure of disease progression, and we can forecast disease progression in a way that's got very accurate all the way out to long times. We can do this as well and look at predicting which patients will actually progress quickly and which will progress more slowly, and we can do that with very high discrimination. Not only are we doing this, of course, just for the total ALS-FRS scale, we do it for every single individual component of that scale. Also, we can predict overall survival, forced vital capacity, and dozens of labs and vitals. So we are talking about one generative model that predicts all of these different things. We'll be adding, over the next few weeks, a number of additional things that we'll be looking to incorporate into this model as well. Now, these models are somewhat complex. We have deep neural networks inside generative models producing these probabilistic forecasts, and they're quite comprehensive. And I could stand up here for hours and talk about all of the go through tables of numbers to describe how they work. But no one wants to see that, right? But nonetheless, there are all of these important questions like, what are the actual inputs to these models? What are their outputs? How well do the models really perform? How sensitive is that performance to, say, different subpopulations or to missing inputs? Because maybe different studies are measuring different patient characteristics. And we want to make sure that we can answer all of these questions and provide a lot more transparency about what our models do and how well they do it. And so from now on, every single time we release a new digital twin generator, we will also release that with a detailed technical specification. So there is one now for our Alzheimer's disease DTG, version 3, which you can go to our website and download immediately. So if you want any information about how this model performs and what it really does, there are dozens of tables of numbers that you can now find whatever information that you want. And of course, we also have that same information for our new ALS model. Every time we release a model, we'll be releasing it with a new spec sheet that provides as much detail as possible on these different characteristics. And we're going to be doing that often. We will be releasing both new, as in new indications, and updates to our digital twin generators every single month from now on. So we are going to be rapidly expanding into new indications. And we are already at work on updates to our AD and ALS models, which will be out sometime in July. Now, there's one other thing that we'd like to introduce here, which are digital twin dashboards. And I'd like to turn this over to my co-founder, John Walsh, to tell you a little bit about that.
Thanks, Charles. I'm John Walsh, the head of data science and one of the co-founders of Unlearn. I'm proud to show everyone a dashboard we've built to let customers interact with digital twins of participants in their study. The digital twins are created from the baseline data of study participants and predict progression through time, assuming participants are in the control arm. This dashboard gives you deeper insight into a study. It lets you compare digital twins between individual participants across dozens of variables. Look at the digital twins for subgroups of participants and compare between subgroups, and compare the digital twin predictions for all participants in the study to publish results of control arms for notable studies. We'll step through each of these views using data from an example study in Alzheimer's disease that we'll call AD Demo. First, we'll look at digital twins of individual participants in our study. When we work in a clinical trial, we produce digital twins of all participants in the study. These twins include predictions of the primary and key secondary endpoints in the trial, as well as dozens of other variables of interest through time. Let's start with CDR sum of boxes. In this view, we see a plot and a table. The table lists key characteristics of every single participant in the study. The plot shows the distribution of the selected outcome of interest over all digital twins through time. We can click on an individual participant in the table and see their digital twin on the plot. This shows the mean and the confidence of the digital twin for that participant through time, and we can click on other participants to compare and identify those we might want to follow up on later. We can also look at the outcome itself, not just the change from baseline, and we can select from dozens of other variables of interest to look at. This includes components of endpoints and labs. For example, let's click on systolic blood pressure, where we see the predicted distribution through time for all participants and for the selected digital twin. Digital twins are so comprehensive, and we can use them to solve lots of interesting problems in clinical trials. Let's take a look at subgroups of participants within the study. Subgroups are really useful tools to understand the study population better. Like in the previous case, here we see the primary and key secondary endpoints in the study. Let's click on ADAS-Cog 11. This view shows a table and a plot. The plot is showing digital twin predictions through time for all participants in the study for the selected endpoint. The table is showing different subgroups and key properties of each subgroup. This is a mild to moderate AD study, and we've defined separate mild and moderate subgroups of participants. Clicking on each row shows the digital twin predictions for that subgroup on the plot. And you can see that the moderate AD group tends to progress more than the mild one, which makes sense because the moderate one is more severe. We can evaluate this observation across different endpoints, such as CDR sum of boxes. And we can also define our own fine-grained subgroups to answer more detailed questions about the study population. Finally, let's discuss digital twins for the entire study. Good clinical trial design is critical to identify effective treatments. And one of the key factors in the design of a trial is the expected outcome of the control arm. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, if my control arm progresses too little, then I am less sensitive to clinically meaningful improvements from the study drug. Digital twins are an excellent tool to understand the expected control outcome from the study, even before the study is completed. This view in the dashboard provides a way to see this directly. Let's look at CDR sum of boxes. Here, in this view, we see a plot and a table. The plot is showing the digital twin predictions through time for the selected endpoint for all participants in the study. The table lists our study against several important completed AD clinical trials and shows key properties of these studies. We've also collected the published control outcomes for different studies. We can click on individual rows in the table and see those published outcomes against the predictions from the digital twins for our study. For example, here I've selected Emerge, Engage, and Clarity, 3 important recently completed AD clinical trials. We can look at the differences in designs of our study against these studies and understand the sensitivity of our study in more detail. And we can do this across different endpoints. If you would like to use this dashboard yourself and see digital twins of the participants of your study, please contact our BD team for more information. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Digital twin, this is something I'm incredibly excited about. To give people the opportunity to actually really tangibly interact with the digital twins of the patients in their study is going to unlock a whole bunch of use cases probably that we haven't even thought of. And that's something, getting these in the hands of our customers and seeing all of the cool things people can do with them, I think is going to be really exciting. But of course, there are use cases that we have thought of. So let's talk a little bit for the rest of the time about how we can actually leverage patients' digital twins to improve clinical trials. Clinical trials are the main bottleneck in drug development. In large phase 3 studies, people are recruiting and enrolling thousands of patients, often at like $100,000 per patient. So they are incredibly time-consuming, they're expensive, and they're risky, with 9 out of 10 drugs that enter in clinical trials actually failing. Are there things that we can use this new technology to improve about that process? So there are 2 main value propositions that we can provide to clinical trial sponsors. One is that we can help design clinical trials that are able to achieve the same power, but can use smaller control groups. Or alternatively, we can work with sponsors to design trials that achieve much more power with the same sample size. And that provides 2 different things. Well, you can either shorten your enrollment times. By shrinking the size of the control group, you have fewer overall patients to enroll, and you make your trial much more attractive to potential participants. So you kill 2 birds with 1 stone, something that is good for the sponsor and something that is good for all of the potential trial participants. Alternatively, if you choose to keep the same sample size, you can use the information from patients' digital twins to shrink the confidence intervals and be able to make better decisions. So hopefully you're able to go from this to this. We call these TwinRCTs. Importantly, the way we think about a TwinRCT, and it's in the name, is that it's a RCT, a randomized controlled trial. Our goal is not to replace randomized controlled trials with other kinds of designs, but instead to augment them, to make them better, to incorporate digital twins in a way that these can be more efficient and we can get better decisions while keeping all of the properties of traditional randomized trials that we want. So how this works is that just as in a regular clinical trial, a large group of people, of real, actual patients with that indication, are enrolled in the study. And at the very first visit, we're going to take information from those patients. We're going to input it into one of our pre-trained digital twin generators, and we're going to create those patients' digital twins. And we're going to do this for every single patient in the study. And those patients will end up being randomized to the treatment group, being randomized to a control group, just like normal. But for every patient, we're going to use their digital twin to forecast a prognostic score. We're going to compute what their expected outcome would be if they were to be randomized to the placebo group in this trial. So if they were not to receive the experimental treatment, how would their disease evolve over the course of that clinical trial? And then we're going to adjust for patients' prognostic scores in the analysis of the trial. Now, it wouldn't be an Unlearn presentation with at least one, without at least one equation in it, so I had to stick this in there. I don't need people to understand what it is. I need people to understand the value. And the value is that the better and better our digital twins can predict the outcomes for these different patients, can predict who is going to progress quickly and who is going to progress more slowly, the smaller the control group in your clinical trial can be while maintaining the same power. So we can, if we can say, for example, get a correlation of around 0.5, you can shrink the size of your control group by approximately 40%, keeping the same exact statistical properties. But if you want to keep the same sample size and instead leverage the information from the digital twins to increase power, you can do that as well, and it's the same basic story. The better our digital twin generators are at predicting patient outcomes, the more power you can have in a clinical trial. So if you say start with an 80% power and you get a correlation of around 0.5, you are increasing your power to around 90%. So you can make much more confident decisions. This approach is actually qualified by the European Medicines Agency for use in phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials with continuous outcomes. This was something that was one of the biggest milestones in the history of the company we accomplished last year. Multi-year process of going through regulatory review with the EMA. And it's very important to us that not only are we trying to develop things that are innovative and technologies and software that customers can use, but that we do it in a way that preserves all of the rigor that you would have in a standard clinical trial, and in a way that allows us to really pioneer the regulatory pathway for the use of AI within clinical trials. And not only the EMA, where we have actually gone through regulatory review, but the FDA also published a recent guidance, and the methodologies that we use in terms of creating prognostic scores from historical data and applying them to increase the power, or in the sample size estimation of clinical trials, are all fully consistent with these guidances from FDA and from EMA. So TwinRCTs provide three things. Well, fundamentally, they leverage this additional information about patients, forecasts for their future outcomes, to deliver more power so that people can make better decisions, or to enable designs that have smaller control groups so that people can cut clinical trial timelines and make their trials more attractive to potential participants. And this method is supported by regulatory guidance now. We don't need regulatory guidance to change. We don't need to anything. This is supported by regulatory guidance now. So it provides unbiased estimates of treatment effects and can be deployed into clinical trials today. But we do want to move forward and continue to innovate. So that was, TwinRCTs were an amazing solution. They are an amazing solution. But we think that we can leverage more information about our patients' digital twins to improve clinical trials even further. And we're going to call these the second generation of TwinRCT, because the value proposition is basically the same. But the information that we're going to use is a little different. Earlier, I told you that models that can tell you when they're wrong can be really useful. And I showed you that we have been developing new digital twin generators that are especially good at providing calibrated estimates of uncertainty. They can tell us when they are wrong. So for some patients, they can make very confident predictions, and for other patients, less confident. And we can leverage that information to improve clinical trials even further. So for each patient in a second-generation TwinRCT, we will, of course, compute their prognostic score, the expected outcome, just like before. But in addition to that, we're also going to compute an uncertainty in that prognostic score. And then we're going to perform an adjustment for the prognostic score, but we're going to emphasize data from patients with more predictable outcomes. So the only thing that is different is this weight. It's basically Procova, the method that we had taken through EMA review, but now with this additional weight. Some patients get emphasized if we can make confident predictions about their outcomes. It's a very small change. So what does this small change do? I'll illustrate one example through a case study. This is a study of previously completed clinical trial for Alzheimer's disease. And we can look at the power to detect an effect in the clinical dementia rating scale, a change in it at 12 months. The unadjusted analysis here, like in many clinical trials, is powered for around 80%. If we use our digital twin generator and we create prognostic scores and we leverage our EMA qualified approach, we could increase the power from 80% to 83%. That seems like a small gain, but actually you'd have to enroll a lot of additional patients to get that gain in power. That's a meaningful thing. But by incorporating this additional information, we can increase the power all the way up to 87%. That's a big jump and a big improvement in our ability to make confident decisions out of these clinical trials. So by leveraging the uncertainty in our model's predictions, we can decrease the uncertainty in your clinical trials. And we can do this in a way that is still unbiased, that still produces valid confidence intervals and p-values, but provides more statistical power. And we're going to have a paper, actually a couple papers, one a scientific publication plus a white paper describing these case studies coming out in a few weeks. So we've announced quite a few new things here today. And the first thing to mention is that every single one of our new customers is going to get all of these things. So as always, Unlearn's customers get digital twins of the participants in their clinical trial. But going forward, everyone will also get a digital twin dashboard so that they can actually interact with and explore the data from those patients' digital twins. And we will provide everyone with both the TwinRCT1 and TwinRCT2 analyses. So what have we actually done? What are all the things that we've announced here today? One, which I mentioned at the beginning, but I kind of swept the details under the rug, is that we have actually introduced a completely new machine learning methodology, a totally new kind of generative model. I don't think that we've even begun to scratch the surface of what this technology is capable of doing. But we've also focused on a couple of applications of this technology. We've released a new digital twin generator for patients with Alzheimer's disease that is more accurate, than our previous version, but also provides these really great calibrated estimates of how uncertain it is in its predictions. We've also released a new digital twin generator for ALS. We've introduced detailed technical specifications that everyone can download from our website that tell all of the technical details and performance measurements about how these models perform across subpopulations and with respect to different inputs. We've also introduced a new software tool, digital twin dashboards, that allow our customers to interact with and explore the digital twins of the patients in their study. And we've introduced a new generation of more powerful TwinRCT. So a lot of new things all in this short presentation. But everyone should stay tuned, because we will be continuing to release new things every single month this year. A lot of new digital twin generators for many new indications are on the horizon. So if you're interested in partnering with us or collaborating to discuss how we can leverage digital twins to improve your clinical trials, please reach out to us at unlearn.ai, because I think we can help. Thank you.